Hello out there, Michael Thingser here. Coming Back Stronger is a special edition podcast series focusing on the way food and drinks businesses are bouncing back as the world are slowly starting to reopen from COVID-19. We will especially be sharing great stories on how progressive leaders are bouncing back from the pandemic by using the power of technology and delivery. By listening to these conversations in the coming period, we'll be able to pick up great stories, insights and facts, as well as best practices from industry experts, independent operators to national chains who all are setting a new standard for how to operate in the new normal. Vita Mojo and Hospitality Maverick join forces on this project due to have shared beliefs on how tech plays a massive role in building companies that's good for people, communities and the planet. In this episode, we have Hugo Engel as our guest. He works with digital transformation at the progressive operator Leon Restaurants. Hugo and I talked about how Leon has pivoted through the pandemic, how this has brought forward a lot of innovation on all fronts. We also talked about digital transformation in the restaurant industry and how it's really taking off now, and how to keep the experience human, as well the importance of thinking out of the box to find solutions that keep you in business. Lots of digital nuggets in this episode. Tune in and enjoy. Welcome to the Coming Back Stronger special edition podcast series. And today we are in late May. And there's a lot of activity right now in the market in general. Restaurants are starting to open up. Some have never been closed. And actually, today we have a guest as part of an organization that has not been closed during the pandemic. They have been doing a lot of stuff. And that's Hugo from Leon. So welcome to the podcast, Hugo.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
It's super interesting to have you on as a guest because besides you're from Leon, you also work with the digital side of things. And that's something that's really have taken up during the pandemic, and we'll come back to that. So people that don't know who Hugo is, and I think the most people know who Leon is, but just to give people a grasp about who are you and what organization you're from and what role do you have within that before we start diving into the deeper conversation about digitalization and the pandemic.
Sure. So Leon, very briefly, was founded 16 years ago by John Vincent and Henry Dimbleby to try and answer the question, what would fast food be like in heaven? And very simply, we think fast food in heaven would taste good, do you good, and be kind to the planet. And Leon has grown according to those principles to become a healthy fast food chain with over 70 restaurants. And 1,000 team members. Me personally, I joined Leon about 6 months ago now with a focus on digital innovation. So both transforming existing areas of our business, like introducing digital ordering to our restaurants, and then also working with partners to build new sort of digital-based business propositions. Most recently, Feed Britain, and soon the Leon Club. Bit of background on me. Before Leon, I had a long and illustrious career. Just kidding. I'm 22, just graduated from university last year from LSE, where I studied political science and philosophy. Originally, I sort of at university wanted to go into politics. Then I realized throughout my time there that actually it's technology that is shaping the world more than politicians are at the moment. And if I wanted to be part of creating sort of real positive change to shape our collective future, it was technology where I should be working rather than politics. And I was particularly interested by the Leon opportunity because not only is, I think, Leon an industry-leading company, but also I think the hospitality sector in particular is super interesting in that it's quite late to be disrupted by technology. There's a great sort of graph of digital disruption by sector, and hospitality is second to the bottom, just above construction. And I think there's clearly a lot of potential there. And we're at the beginning of our journey in that respect, and I'm really at the beginning of my own journey and learning new things every day. And I guess, today I'm going to learn what it's like to do a podcast interview, which I'm super excited about. And maybe next time, Michael, I should be interviewing you really, because I just from the outset of before the recording started, some of the experiences you've had are way more interesting than anything I've got to say. So I'd love to be able to ask you some questions about your own experiences too, another time maybe.
We can definitely get that organized over maybe a social distance coffee even. So yeah, so you're part of now, as you say, you're part of an industry that has been very slow to get into the digitalization maturity curve, and I totally agree with you. And I would say I agree that I would call them laggards, and sometimes I would say even some people are in the dark ages when it comes to the technology and using technology to boost the business. But if we just zoom into today and say we take technology out of the equation and talk a bit about the pandemic, and you joined Leon very briefly 6 months ago, and you run directly in together with Leon into the pandemic. How has this impacted Leon? And you one of the few ones that have stayed open during the whole pandemic. How has this all been, and what's going on right now, and what initiatives have you done? Because there's a lot that's been happening. There's been a lot in the media around Leon, so just be good to hear from somebody from the inside. What are the things you've done and why you've done them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot has changed, and it was quite a strange 6 months from the sort of first 3 months, I guess, to the last 3 months. For me personally, there's been massive challenges, massive disruption to the way that we operate. We've had to close almost all our restaurants. I mean, as you mentioned at the outset, we have kept restaurants open throughout our whole time, but we've closed most of our restaurants. We've unfortunately, most of our team members have been furloughed, and most of our customers are now eating at home, and not in our restaurants anymore. So it's been a really challenging time, as it has for the whole industry, and there's been a lot of hardship associated with that. But then the sort of other side of that is that I think has accelerated a lot of the innovation that we were sort of planning, and were on our sort of annual roadmap. Things that were going to take months happened in a matter of weeks, and then things which we weren't even considering at this stage and never thought we would be doing, like feeding the NHS, happened very quickly as well. And it's been a huge learning experience for us as a company as well. And hopefully we're going to come out of this stronger as a result. Very briefly, a timeline of what happened. After the lockdown was imposed, we very quickly changed our restaurants into grocery shops. So we were just selling like mini supermarkets the stock that we were using in our meals. So we're using the stock that we had in our restaurants anyway, came from our suppliers, and then just selling it to customers just like a mini supermarket. But we also sort of wanted to do something more than that, and we recognized that the sort of brick and mortar restaurants as sort of distribution hubs probably weren't going to be very effective, sort of post lockdown, or as in during the lockdown. And so we also set up, and this is mainly what I've been working on in the last few months, a direct to consumer platform called Feed Britain, where our food service suppliers can sell their goods directly to customers who aren't able to access them. So sort of the context on that is, at the same time as we saw the supermarkets being stretched in their supply chains, that in some cases their shelves were empty, the food service suppliers were facing their demand completely drying up because all the restaurants were shutting down. And they were thinking about having to lay people off, and in some cases businesses which had been running for decades were sort of facing being closed down entirely because they had no way to reach their customers. And so we set up Feed Britain as a way for those food service suppliers to reach their customers, because even though even though people aren't eating out at restaurants anymore, that sort of 35% of food consumption, which is food prepared outside of the home, hasn't gone away. It's not as if people are consuming 35% less calories than they were before. Those are, as we know, are just sort of shifting consumption patterns. And so everything we're trying to do at Leon is to change the way that we can allow customers to access food in a way that suits those new consumption patterns. And then, sort of, in addition to the mini supermarkets and the Feed Britain platform, we've also been running our Feed NHS campaign, which was a campaign to deliver free, hot, healthy meals to NHS critical care workers during the lockdown, and continuing still. And so we sort of brought together a coalition of Baxter Story, for example, Meal Force, Feed Our Frontline, and together we've been serving 40,000 meals a day to hospitals for free. And we were very grateful to Matt Lucas and his baked potato song, and for Damian Lewis to help raise awareness and generate the funds for that. And we've been serving those meals out of our Leon restaurants, which has also provided us with an opportunity to keep some of our team members busy as well in the restaurants.
It's amazing what you have achieved in, what are we talking about, 10 weeks now? We're in the 10th week, I think, of this.
Honestly, I've completely lost my sense of time during this. You could have said like 30 weeks or 2 weeks.
I was just trying to calculate back, but I couldn't even remember the date in my own head. So it's super interesting. You're bringing Leon into people's home, and what have been the big learnings about? Because this is do you think the Feed Britain is a new revenue stream, I guess, or something that was on the roadmap, as you said, to be brought in later, some of these digitalization things? And I guess there's a number of other things you're doing from an operational context. We'll come back to that. But how has that been rolling that out? Because it's national, as I understand. It's not just London or where your stores are. You're doing this national, and that's quite a complex thing to do in no time.
Yeah, so it's not quite national yet. It's southeast of England so far, but soon we're going to be rolling out nationally. And the main barrier to that, and actually the main challenge we sort of faced with it when we were setting it up, is the logistics of delivery. So it's something that Leon had never got into before. We never were interested in that part of the value chain. But it was completely necessary in order to get that food from food service suppliers to people's homes. So it could reach people who weren't able to go to supermarkets or didn't want to go to supermarkets during lockdown. And I guess like the obvious solution to that in normal times would be to reach out to the online grocery delivery companies, like Ocado, for example. But in COVID times, these guys were completely over capacity. As we know, customers were struggling to get a delivery slot on Ocado for weeks, which is part of the reason why we set up Feed Britain to begin with. And then on the other hand, the other sort of route for home delivery are the generic sort of courier services, the DPDs, the APCs of this world. But the issue there is that they're all geared up for ambient delivery and not for delivery of chilled goods. And with all the sort of food safety concerns that comes with that, it requires a lot of careful preparation and packaging on our side to ensure that those would be food safe. And we didn't. That's something that takes a couple of months, not a couple of weeks. So in the end, we were stuck for a little bit. But then we sort of went back to our first principles of why we set up Feed Britain, which was to support the food service suppliers. And we realized that a lot of these food service suppliers they have logistics operations to deliver to restaurants, and they had van drivers, and we spoke to some who were laying off their own van drivers um, because simply the restaurants were closed. They weren't operating any new deliveries. Also, at the same time, in the supermarket supply chain, they didn't have enough van drivers. So it was another sort of market inefficiency that we wanted to try and solve, and we wanted to try and keep those van drivers and delivery guys for the food service suppliers in their jobs. And so we went to Premier Fruits, who are a fruit and veg wholesaler who operate out of New Covent Garden Market. And we partnered with them to do the home delivery of the Feed Britain boxes. So they had a spare warehouse in New Covent Garden Market where they could do all the picking and packing of the boxes. And then also they have the van drivers for home delivery. But the other thing we learn is that there's a big difference between restaurant delivery, B2B delivery, and home delivery. And the big difference there is just the sort of number of drops you're doing per day. Going from just doing a handful of restaurant delivery drops per day to doing maybe 100 drops to people's homes, and with that comes routing optimization for fuel efficiency and for time efficiency. And you need the software to support that. And it also, rightly, customers have much greater expectations in terms of delivery and sort of being informed in when their delivery is going to arrive and exactly what slot it's going to arrive in, and having all the customer service channels set up to support that than restaurants do. And that has been a journey with Premier Fruits to get to sort of set them up for home delivery in that way, and it's something we're still working through. But yeah, I mean that is just, I guess, one example of something we've learned and a challenge we've had to try and overcome with the Feed Britain project.
It's very interesting. Yeah, of course, it's very different. Suddenly, you're not doing your hospitality service kind of thing. You're doing more a transaction thing where people has a need for something in their home. But have people, you've been one of the first movers on this, and you've seen others following you guys and done similar thing or done it at the same time. Um, do you think that also the consumer is more forgiving in this time when you're trying it out in such an environment? You have more ability to learn and improve fast without having big repercussions of making a mistake, because we come from an area where everything had to look perfect almost, to now where that's what I feel, even with the local greengrocer and butcher, you're a bit more overbearing with things. You just think, yeah, well, it is what it is. It's understandable. It's not easy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I completely agree. I think consumers are more forgiving, and things like, for example, to take sort of what I was just talking about, the on the delivery slots. In normal times, customers would expect to be able to select the exact slot that their box will be delivered in. In COVID times, for example, most of them are in their homes anyway, and so we can be a bit looser in terms of giving them the time that their box will be delivered. But I think a sort of more profound point than just that is that I think people are more willing to change their habits right now. I think consumer behavior is just in a state of flux right now, where people are more willing to adopt a behavioral change, whereas before they would be more sort of rigid and fixed in sort of the way they're used to transacting and the way they're used to buying food, especially. And to take a sort of another example of something else we're doing and where we've seen that. And so our other big project right now is digital ordering in the restaurants. And whereas before we'd been focusing mainly on the kiosk channel for that, we're now focusing a lot on mobile ordering, and which we're calling smart ordering, ordering from your smartphone. And before creating that behavioral change from customers who are used to ordering over the counter to ordering on their phone, it was really hard to do. And that's kind of where kiosks came in, and it's kind of the way I see kiosks as a kind of a bridge between the two. So customers were finding it easier to order on a kiosk and then transition to ordering on their phone. And I think that's maybe quite a specific dynamic to the UK. When I sort of work with our restaurants in the US, it's actually the other way around, in that they've sort of started from a mobile place. Mobile ordering has been more widespread, and only now kiosks are starting to be deployed. But for the UK, sort of that behavioural change, going straight from ordering over the counter at the till from mobile, has become so much more possible now than it was before. So whereas before, we were really anticipating having to have a 5-year bridge really from with kiosks supporting that move from till to mobile. Now in our Jubilee Place restaurant, which is entirely digital, so no transactions are over the till, we have both the mobile ordering channel and the kiosk. And at the moment, we're seeing 60% of the customers ordering on their phones and 40% on their kiosks. So people are actually more willing to order on their phones than before. And a lot of that, I think, has got to do with safety and hygiene. And I can talk a bit more, if you'd like, about sort of how I think we can use mobile ordering to sort of improve the safety and hygiene of ordering in restaurants.
Okay, yeah, it actually is a very, very, very good place actually to start to talk about, what are you then? Because like one of the things that's been talked about a lot the last couple of weeks, one thing is, when are we going to open? That's the big question. When are we going to fully blow open? I think it looks like it's going to be sooner. This is just my prediction. It's not something I have from somewhere. But looking at McDonald's been out saying this morning, they are going to open a majority of their restaurant, almost 90%. McDonald's often set the pace for many things because of their size and their infrastructure. And I guess they have been talking about as well that, how do we keep our people and customers safe in this new world? Because the pandemic the virus is not gone, because there's not a cure for it. So there's no vaccine right now. So how are you doing that? Because that lead into what you just mentioned there, I think, in a way. How are you using maybe digital things to make people feel safe? Because it's interesting how quickly people are actually going away from screens. And I thought, imagine all these companies that invested heavily the last year in kiosk equipment. People don't want to touch that screen now because we are paranoid, about this thing still in our back of our head. And I think there's going to be a slowdown of it as we move forward, but it's still very close to us in our minds when we go out. I think there's going to be some really weird situation happening because people are still finding out, how do I behave in this? How do I walk past people in a busy city? How do I go into a restaurant and order without being 1 meter or less from somebody? So it'd be interesting to hear what you're doing to make people feel safe, because it's the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's feeling safe before we do anything.
Yeah. And yeah, I think the kiosk question is really interesting. And like, to be honest, I think it's too early to really say how customers are going to react to using kiosks as we come out of this crisis. I think, kiosk suppliers, I know, are doing what they can to make them safer. So Vita Mojo, the supplier that we work with, are putting antimicrobial screens on kiosks to help improve hygiene in that way. And then, of course, there's a lot you can do from a restaurant perspective in terms of making sure that they're regularly wiped down. And then there's also a sort of point that currently, throughout the crisis, customers have been using kiosks in supermarkets the whole time. So, someone shared with me a data point that in Tesco's, 90% of the transactions have been going through the kiosk still. So that's sort of on the one hand. But I think, what we've seen in Jubilee Place is that customers are a lot more willing to adopt the mobile ordering solution because it is safer. And the way we've sort of designed the process to make it safer is designed to be completely contact free. So you're having no interaction at all with a team member. where you could risk any contact. So, a customer orders a meal on their phone or on their laptop, on our ordering platform. They pay for it on that same ordering platform. They've selected the time when they're going to pick it up, and then they arrive at the restaurant at the collection time. Simply walk in, find their bag, which will have their meal inside and a sticker on it with their name on it, and pick it up and go. And so that whole process is completely contact free. And compared to ordering at a till, or indeed ordering at a kiosk, I think that seems to be sort of both making it safer for the customers, but also sort of making it much more convenient for the customers in terms of the time they are actually going to spend queuing for the restaurant as well. Because that's the other area of high risk. If you sort of break down the high risk process of getting food from the restaurant, it's not just placing the order itself, but it's also the queuing outside the restaurant. And by using digital ordering, where people are booking their slots at which they arrive, and then using our digital ordering platform with Vitamojo, we can limit how many people can order in each slot. You can then actually take away any queuing at all. So if you can say, for these over this 5 minutes, only 10 people can reserve this slot, then that there's not going to be a queue for people when they're coming to pick up their order. So you're sort of avoiding that part of the process as well. So that's sort of in restaurants how we're looking to improve the safety for customers. But then Feed Britain is another example of that's like almost the safest way for people to get food is they're not leaving their house at all. The food is delivered right to their door, and they're preparing it themselves. And so I think the key is to I guess experiment with different channels. And another channel which we haven't mentioned yet, and I know that you're an expert in is a corporate catering channel as well. And I think that's also sort of particularly interesting at this time, as employers may discourage their employees from leaving the office at all to collect their lunches. But at the same time, canteens are shut down. And so, something we're working on right now is how we deliver the food from our restaurants directly to people's offices as well, so that they don't have to leave the office at all and risk going into a shopping mall or something to collect their food.
I think it's super spot on. Yeah, no employer would like to take that risk right now. That if they gonna have people in the office, and the way they have to operate now, they don't want them to leave the office and then to pick up lunch. And I think you would see employers that will go very far, even paying for food, just to minimize risk. But it's super interesting the way you talk about it. Sounds like you have been done this carefully mapping of your customer and as well, I guess, your employee journey to help minimize risk across all the in-person interaction we used to when we go in and queue in a Leon on any other kind of place to grab lunch. And I guess this is like reimagine the whole way of operating in a way, and there's going to be still a lot of mountain to climb of learnings, because haven't even had maybe the pressure on the restaurants because people has been staying away, as you said, they've been at home. As people start coming back, it's going to be interesting to see how that work, and see how see the complexity rise, I guess, as well. But my core question is here: how do you keep because restaurants and hospitality is about the human experience. We're not selling food; we're selling a service in the end. And how do you keep it human? Have you had some thought about that internally, and how, because Leon is also about this human touch point in a way?
Yeah. So I guess the answer to this is slightly different in before the crisis, in terms of how we use digital ordering to preserve the human sense, whereas during the crisis, and during complete contact free ordering and collection, it's very difficult. So, I mean, I think it's the core challenge for hospitality right now is that, hospitality is fundamentally a social, it's a social sector. What you're selling is social interactions, with people. And so it's almost impossible, I think, to continue having that same level of human interaction, if you're being completely contact free. Um, there are ways you can do it sort of digitally, and there are ways you can, um, use data to sort of personalize your, communications with customers in a contact-free way. So, one advantage of digital ordering, that, we've been benefiting from is, now we can personalize our communications to customers based upon what they're ordering and when they're ordering. And that's sort of one way we can do it, but, I think it doesn't replace the human interaction. And, as we come out of this crisis and we can, have interactions between team members and customers again, what our sort of strategy is for digital ordering, is that we can actually improve the level and the quality of human interactions, because instead of customers ordering at the till, where the team members are, essentially doing a more sort of, machine-like job of taking the taking the order that the customer has said and punching that order into the till, and handing that order over to the customer until the next person comes around, and it's a bit like a machine. We try and avoid that, but on a busy rush hour lunch, it is a bit machine like. But if everyone's digital ordering, then suddenly those team members are freed from, that sort of, that machine like work to instead, do what humans do best, which is to interact, with people. And so we've had team members, before the crisis in our digital restaurant in Fenchurch Street, instead of being behind the till, simply just, putting in orders to a till, they're interacting with our customers as they come in. So we think about it in terms of the Leon super job of the future, which is what is the job that is going to be, the amazing job that everyone wants to have, after automation. And I think for us, that is this host role, where you're like the maitre d'. You're the person who's greeting all the customers as they come in, and the customers, they're your regulars. You can have quality interactions with them. You can chat with them. You can make casual conversation with them because you're freed up from the machine like work of simply transferring their order that they've given to you in speech into a digital form on your till, because they've done that already. And so instead, all your interactions you have are the high quality interactions, of actual conversation, and actual socializing. And I think that is the big win, for humanity, in general, in terms of, sort of digital technology and automation. Is that, and this is an optimistic view, but I think the business processes which are, quickest to be automated are also those which are, most machine-like, and are those which sort of reveal less of our humanity, and that will hopefully free us up, to do the tasks and to do the jobs, which are more human, and bring us back to our core human nature, which, for me is our social interactions and interactions with other people. And I think both on a sort of macro level, that's what we should be heading for as a society, but also in our restaurants, that's what we're heading for too. So instead of, simply transferring orders into a till, our team members can be hosting and interacting, and having real connections, with our customers, in that host role.
That leads very good towards that there's a future as well. We are where we are right now, and everybody is doing the things they need to do and they can do. But how would I believe I have a big belief in that. We don't even know 100% yet how restaurants gonna be looking and how they're gonna be operating on the other say, let's say 12, 18 months. But if you should have a guess from the things you're working with from a digitization point of view, is that you can see technology's role in society around us is increasing, and now the time has really come from the restaurant sector, as you said in the beginning. But how would it look when you go into, let's say, a Leon? in London. How would that be different from what you knew prior to COVID or the pandemic?
Um, so I think the sort of obvious change is that a growing proportion of the transactions will be taking place digitally by the customer rather than over the counter. Um, and I think that when that happens, then that sort of changes the rest of the restaurant as well. And so, it's quite interesting. I often sort of look to China when I'm looking at sort of future trends or sort of innovations in this space which haven't yet happened in the US and the UK. And there's only sort of that sort of comparison only goes so far, and that there are obvious cultural differences between us and China. I don't think, and I actually sort of don't hope that we're ever sort of going to get to a stage where we're paying for our KFC burgers with our faces on public kiosks, as they've been implementing in China, because I think we have some valid concerns about privacy here, which just don't exist in China. But there are innovations in China which I think will be coming here soon, and one of those is the sort of combining of offline and online retail. Alibaba's founder sort of calls it new retail, and he's been experimenting with this in our sort of food and drink space with his sort of supermarket called Hema in China. And there, like you see that the supermarket still exists. It's still a brick and mortar store. It's not as if Hema is an online business entirely. But what that supermarket is, and in that sort of physical space, is combining both the sort of richness you can only get from looking at a piece of fruit or a vegetable in real life, with all the data which you can only get from transacting online. So, for example, you're wandering around the supermarket. It's kind of like a showroom in a way, and you're buying the food that you're seeing on your phone, and that phone is also offering you sort of personalized deals based upon your transaction history. It's allowing you to scan the products that you see in front of you using blockchain for supply chain transparency. It's allowing you to order the food you're seeing in front of you to be delivered to your home, so that you can walk out of that supermarket again without having bags of shopping. So I think that sort of paradigm of combining the online and the offline into new retail is something that we'll see in the UK in the sort of food space as well. And then the other thing, what's on sort of China and lessons from China, which I think is interesting, is and sort of maybe relates more to our Feed Britain project, but it's the sort of trend towards social e-commerce. So the third biggest e-commerce platform in China is called Pinduoduo, and they came from nowhere, and they operate on a very different basis to the sort of Web 1.0 platforms like Amazon in the West. They're a they're a social e-commerce platform, so the entire buying experience is based upon social interaction. So you buy in teams, in groups, and through buying in teams, you gain discounts on the products that you're buying. And instead of having a sort of search orientated user experience on the site, it's a sort of discover orientated user experience, more like you'd be familiar with on Instagram, for example, where you're essentially getting a news feed of products which are recommended towards you. You pick a product, you message your friend on WeChat, share it with them, and hope to get a team together to buy it at a reduced price. And they started in the fresh fruit and veg category. And that's where they've had the most success. And I think they sort of uncovered quite an important truth, which, may be part of the reason why fruit and veg and food in general has been sort of slightly late to be disrupted by e-commerce, which is that it's such a trust-based category. And I think as a trust-based category, it's been sort of underserved by the e-commerce platforms that have been built in the West. But having this social e-commerce platform, I think, allows you to bring the trust and the fun back into sort of purchasing food and drink online. And so sort of where, like, how that is actually relevant to us, where, you know, Pinduoduo and Duo doesn't exist in the West, but we our Feed Britain site operates on the Shopify platform. And, you know, Shopify have just recently announced a partnership with Facebook Shops. Facebook Shops is, for those who haven't sort of read about it yet, is Facebook's play into e-commerce. And, you know, Facebook Shops is going to be the closest thing we have in the West to social e-commerce. And we're, with Feed Britain, going to be very, very interested to see how that changes sort of consumers' behavior on our store when we're selling our boxes on Facebook rather than on Feed Britain. And I think there's a lot of potential there for sort of bringing social e-commerce into the food and drink space in the West, which we haven't yet seen. The other, I guess, like another sort of thing for the future, which we're currently exploring, is voice as an ordering platform. I think it's, you know, it's still in its nascent stages, and, you know, for the moment, you know, mobile and kiosk are certainly more important. But I think you know, it is the most intuitive way to order food or drink, or, you know, transact a tool, and to remove that, like, remaining interface that you have with ordering on your mobile and kiosk. So you're speaking entirely intuitively and entirely naturally with voice, and ordering in that way, I think, is something which is really interesting to us. And we're exploring trialing voice ordering in our restaurants as well. But this is something which is the very early stages, so I don't want to talk about it too much.
No, but it's interesting with voice. I think there's a lot of trial, Chipotle, McDonald's, to give some sample of the really big boys trying it again, and it's interesting how fast that's going to move now as well, with the whole safety kind of angle on it, because again, it's a way of not having a touch or have to touch the screen. And so I think it's going to go very fast. Often when there's a demand, technologies evolve very quickly, because then there's the funding to do it as well, and the will to implement it, which is often the biggest challenge with technology as you want to put it into organizations. So if you were giving, you know, like your top three, Hugo, advice to operators or leaders out there, what they should do preparing for reopening or being part of the new world, the new paradigm, the new now, the new normal, what has been called the last couple of months, what is the top three things you would start to put in place? Because I guess it's all about what's important for the next 5 to 10 years when you do these things. But what is that you would get started with right now that could benefit, you know, both your customers but also your employees?
So I think, I mean, it's something we've sort of discussed a lot, but, you know, the importance of digital ordering, you know, can no longer be underestimated and no longer ignored. So if, you know, if restaurants haven't already looked into setting up their own digital ordering platform, I think now's the time they should be doing it. And, you know, the benefits this can bring in terms of you know, safety in the sort of immediate short term, but then sort of longer term, and this will be so much more important as well, as, you know, restaurants struggle after the COVID crisis. You know, being able to operate at a lower labor model, and being able to offer an experience as well for the customers, which is more convenient and sort of meets them where they're at in terms of their own behavior and the way they order in sort of every other sector and every other channel. But then also in terms of gathering data. And that's why I think it's important that restaurants look at their own ordering platform rather than simply sort of signing up to the third parties click and collect options. And then I guess that sort of leads on a bit into the second bit of advice, which would be being able to use that data effectively to both improve marketing, and I think the e-commerce paradigm is a really useful one when restaurants and the food service industry should be thinking about how we do marketing. So once you've collected all this data, linking customers to their transactions, you can then market and communicate with them in a way which we've never been able to do before. And previously, we'd only be able to do if we're operating an e-commerce business. And that can obviously improve retention for our customers, drive frequency, but also all that data helps us gain insight into the new ways that customers are going to be consuming food and want to consume food, and what products they want to see. And I think that's going to be particularly important, sort of being able to really understand our customers' changing patterns through what's going to be a really turbulent time, continue to be a turbulent time. And then the third thing would be to think outside of the restaurant entirely, and really think completely outside of the way you're currently operating, and experiment with new channels. So, I think the direct to consumer sort of food retail channel is really interesting right now. And Feed Britain, I guess, would be our play on that. But then there's also the sort of B2B channel, which Michael, we were discussing a bit as well, which is going through a period of massive change. And so I think those are, I guess, a couple of examples of things that operators could do, which are sort of outside of the bricks and mortar restaurant business.
It's super interesting what you're saying there as well, is that, there's a need for automation. That's been the theme we talked about in this episode. And you say that, like, look into it now and get it done, but also shorten your route to the consumer's table. And then again, coming back to if you already have a business people trust, you will have a very good chance online as well. Because as you said, food is very basically about, do I trust you or do I not trust you? That's basically how hardcore a food decision is when you go in somewhere. And then the whole thing about, try to think outside your normal restaurant walls and think about how do consumer actually wants to consume food. Because I think it's going to be very different when we've been home cooking for 10 weeks. We're going to have a very different approach to food, or some of us will definitely have. And I think that's the key thing. We still want the convenience, but we will know more about ingredients. We'll be connected much more with food than we was prior to the pandemic. So I think very good points there, Hugo. Very good advice.
Thank you. I feel like I'm in no place to give advice to all the much more experienced operators who will be listening, but those are my sort of naive little thoughts anyway.
Well, the great thing about the situation we're in is that the canvas has been washed off, and it doesn't matter. It's good to have experience, but your previous way of doing it and it's probably not going to solve the problem, So as Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem with the same ways and methods it was created, So you actually have to think out of the box and come with new ways. So it's probably good to have a clean sheet when you go into this, so you're not too connected to old habits, as you called them before. So, but Hugo, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your personal and some of the experience from Leon. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that are gonna gain some great insights about this and start reflecting on what they can do in their businesses. So good power and energy to you and to Leon, and the journey coming ahead. It's going to be a steep one, but I'm sure it looks like you are ahead of the curve and good things are happening.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on. And I hope I'm able to ask you some questions another time too, because I would love to find out more about your experience. It sounds super interesting and learn from that.
Wow. Thank you, Hugo, for your great insights into how to kickstart your digital transformation and the importance of keeping it human. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please give us a like, share it with the people you think would benefit from it, rate it, and let us know what you think. Coming Back Stronger podcast series is brought to you by the wonderful people at Vita Mojo, the digital partner for ambitious operators. who are helping Leon, Yo Sushi, Farmer J, and other leading brands transform their businesses with technology. Check them out at software.vitamojo or contact them directly at nick.lidl@vitamojo.com. Thanks for listening.